Hello everyone. Today's tutorial is remaking the Final Fantasy XV Warp Strike. I have a sword actor, which when thrown does one of three things. If the sword reaches the end of the throw in an open spot, the character will move to it and re-grab the sword. If we hit a wall, we can grab onto it and hang until we detach. While not truly how it works in the game, I do already have another tutorial on grapple points, so I didn't want to double dip. However, this will work with several walls of different slopes, but we can designate some angles to be too steep for it to work, in which case we just return the sword. And of course, when hitting an enemy actor, we warp to it and strike it with an attack. The animations are pulled from Mixamo, but you can check the Ko-fi link in the description to get them already converted to Unreal Engine 5, and follow along with the tutorial. Alright, so the only thing I have imported into this project are two animations taken directly from Mixamo. We'll have this hanging idle animation that we'll use when we have our Warp Strike hitting a wall, so our character can hang in the air. And we have another one that's a sword and shield animation that we're actually going to chop up to make a swing and a strike. And rather than having multiple animations, we'll just go through and set up sections so we don't have to have multiple files. Before we do any of that, we're going to be making our sword. So we'll make a new blueprint actor, and we'll just call this BP sword. And you can import whatever mesh you want. I'm just going to make a simple cube. We're going to be doing quite a bit with it. So I'll change the scale to something like 1.02 and 0.02. Just that it's something that's really tiny like that. And just so that we're not looking at a white hole, I'm going to make a quick material to make that pop. Call that M_sword. Hold down 3 and click to get a 3 vector. Do the same thing for M for a multiply. Connect our base color. Connect that into the multiply and put that into our emissive color. Multiply it by something like 5 and change it to a color that you like. Once you've done that, we can get rid of the material because we're not going to use it again. And then we want to change this pivot point. So then the scene root component in the back is roughly where our hands would be for our skeletal mesh. So maybe taking up 2 squares on the grid here. Then we'll compile that. Then we're going to open up our third person character. And we're going to add this to our character's mesh by socketing it. So we can open up our skeletal mesh asset. And I like to just copy the hand grip. So whichever one you want, choose hand grip R. So we can right click and copy. We'll select the socket. Then we right click on the hand R and paste the socket. Then we can have that just be our S_sword. And that will be where we attach our sword to on our character. So there's a couple different ways to do this. I'm just going to get a keyboard press and bind it to F. Can right click and get spawn actor from class. Choose BP sword. And we'll have to split the structured pin for the transform. We'll manually attach this, but it's going to throw an error if you don't have anything in at least the scale category. Then we'll right click this to promote it to a variable. This will be our BP sword, which we could just call sword. Then we'll drag in our sword, convert it to a validated get. So then we press it. If we don't already have one spawned, then we'll spawn one. And if we do already have one spawned, we can just drag up from our sword and destroy actor. Then right to the side of that, we'll make a new custom event. We'll call this attach sword. We'll right click and we'll get attach actor to component. Our target is going to be our sword. The parent is going to be our character's mesh. We want our location and rotation to snap to target. And our socket is going to be what we just made, S_sword. And then we just need to call attach sword right after we declared the variable. And when we press F, it'll spawn the sword, so we just need to change that by 90 degrees. So we'll go back to our socket. And then we'll subtract 90 from the relative rotation of our Y value. So now we have that roughly attached to us. We have collision, so it's doing a bunch of weird stuff. So we're going to go into our sword. So on our cube, we'll search for collision. And then we're going to just select no collision. So now we spawn it, and I'm not going to change the locomotion, so we're just going to be stabbing ourselves in the face a little bit, but it stays attached to the socket. So now we can play our animations, attach it and detach it, and it's going to just work for our purposes. So we're done with our mesh. Just get this out of the way. The first thing we're going to work on is actually fleshing out our sword. We're going to want to add a projectile movement component, as that's the easiest way to get the character to actually throw the sword. We're going to change the gravity scale to 0 because we want it to fly in a straight line. Then we'll want to change the initial and max speed to something like 1500. Then we can come back and adjust that as we see fit. And we'll also want to have rotation follows velocity. We also do not want to have this active at the start. So auto activate, we need to uncheck. To initiate the throw, we're going to go into our third person character. And we're going to be going to the animation for our sword and shield and convert that to a montage. Just going to rename it M_warp strike. So we'll get another keyboard press event. This time I'll change it to the left mouse button. We'll only want to do this if we have our sword equipped, so we'll convert that to a validated get. Then we'll get our mesh and we'll play a montage. Choose our warp strike montage. And we're going to open it. We're going to set a notify from where we want to have the sword leave our grab. So roughly around frame 40. We'll add a notify. And we'll name it throw. We'll switch on the notify name from the beginning. Can remove default and just add what we named it. We want to take our sword, and we'll want to get the sword's root component. Then we want to detach from component. We're going to switch the location and the rotation rule to keep world. We'll copy our sword, then we'll get the projectile movement. We're going to set the velocity. Then we're going to activate it. So the velocity is going to be in the direction of our character's forward vector. And velocity is also going to match the speed up to our max speed. So we could just get a multiply, connect it, change it to an integer. We could just say something like 10,000. Doesn't matter that much. So, as always, when we play a montage, we have to check if our animation's using root motion. Though if we enable it, we don't want our character to actually move. So we're going to enforce the root lock to keep our character in place, but that's going to allow us to be able to move out of this. We're going to make a new variable, and we're going to call it canMove. And we'll set that as false between our validated get and the play montage. And then after our move input, get a branch. And we're only going to allow our movement if canMove is true. So now if we throw it, okay. So we play the whole animation and our character throws and it never returns, and then we're not able to move again because we didn't set move to be false. But we want to have our sword only go a certain distance. So back in our sword, we're going to click on our projectile movement, go down to events, and we're going to click on component activated. We're just going to get a delay of, say, half a second. Then we'll get the projectile movement component, and then we'll deactivate it. Then we're going to make a new event because we have to worry about whether or not this is interrupted or completed. Because if you have a game where your character can be hit in the middle of the animation and it breaks the animation, we want to make sure that we do set canMove to be true. So we'll make a new custom event, and we'll just call it strike interrupted. We'll just take our canMove and set that to be true. So now when we throw, it stops. We'll play the whole animation, but when it completes, we'll be able to move. So, because at this point, it doesn't hit anything and the strike is over, then we'll cancel our animation. But we also want to have it do a different thing if it hits a target that we designate as an enemy class, and we want to do it another thing if it hits a wall that we are able to latch onto. So, when we work on designating all three of those options, we'll get into the canceling of the animation as we go into the next parts. But for now, we're going to be working on finishing out our sword. So we're just going to opt for the tried and true method of doing a box trace. So we'll get a custom event. And we'll call this from our character blueprint, and we'll call that start throw. It's going to set a timer by event. We're going to make another custom event. It's going to be our end throw. And that's just going to clear and invalidate our timer. Off of our timer event. Just going to do a hit trace. have a box trace by channel. The orientation is going to match our sword's orientation, so we're going to just get the actor rotation. The half size we can have be relatively small. We'll just say 2, 2, and 2. And the start and end point is going to be our cube. The first being the world location. And then for the end, we're going to add the forward vector. Then we're going to multiply that by an integer of, say, 40. And then add that to the world location, and that's our end. So set that for the duration. We'll go back to our third-person character. We're going to take our sword again. This time we're going to get the cube. So we had disabled collision, so we're going to need to set collision enabled. However, we just need to turn on probing. That way it can get the contact data. Then we're going to call our start throw event. This timer doesn't have to be at 0.01, but we do need to loop it. We just want this timer to run so then we have a not so heavy overlap of all these traces, but we don't want to have gaps in them. Like so. You can adjust that as you see fit. That's going to be a difference between our time to loop as well as how big you've made the cube. So it's looking for me, it's going to be 0.03 without any overlaps. So now we want to make sure that this can stop when it actually hits something. So we'll get a branch. We're going to check to see if it's our return value combined with the out hit, which we can break, to see if our hit actor is not equal to the player character. That way it won't stop when it hits us, which may or may not happen. Then when it's true, we're going to call our end throw. Just going to pull an object just so that we can hit it. And then we're going to take in our projectile movement, and we want to deactivate it. And we also want to have can move be true. I don't know how I missed that. I do that in like every video. So we throw this, then it stops right in the middle of a wall there. And then when we press F, it disappears, and then it comes back to our hand. We're just going to keep that functionality. But eventually we're going to get to the point where if it hits a wall and it's not a valid place for us to hang on to, it's just going to return automatically. So now we're going to distinguish whether or not we hit a wall or we hit an enemy. So we're going to open up our content drawer. And we can actually just copy our third-person character and paste it and rename it BP Enemy. We'll open that up. We're going to want to click the mesh, and we'll go to collision. Because we're doing a bunch of traces, we want to make sure that our visibility is set to block. And we're also going to, when we hit this, turn it into a physics actor. So we could just select physics actor for the physics body. Then we'll go back to our sword. We're going to branch after our deactivate. So off of our hit actor break, we're just going to check to see what this actor's class is with the get class. That way, if you have a parent class that all your enemies are tied to, you could just check against that. So we'll get against BP enemy. Then we'll make two Boolean variables. First is going to be hit enemy, and the other is going to be hit object. Hit enemy is going to be true off of true. Hit object is going to be true off of false. We'll just worry about hitting an enemy first. So we want to get to our enemy's location. So again, we'll just get the hit actor pin. And get the actor's location. We'll save this as a new variable. And we'll call it target location. In our player blueprint, we'll be setting this as the point that we warp to. We're also going to do the same thing when we hit an object. We're just going to assign that variable differently. And then when we hit, we're going to be using the second part of our animation. So from here, we're going to be setting up our hitbox. We're going to bounce back to our third-person character. And we're going to make a new timer by event. And then we'll make a new custom event, and this is going to be our launch check. This one will have at 0.01 looping. And we're going to drag in our sword. First, we're going to check by getting our hit enemy. And checking to see if that's true. If it's not, then we're going to check to see if we hit an object. Then if that's not true, we want to warp to the end of our sword when it stops mid-air. So we'll check to see our projectile component. And if that's active. If it is active, we'll do nothing. If it's not, then we can warp to our open spot. So we're going to make 3 custom events and build those out. The first is going to be warp to strike. The next is going to be warp to wall. And the next is going to be warp to open. We'll also need to have our timer here promoted to a variable because we'll want to stop it at some point, and we'll just call this our launch timer. And after each one of these, we're going to have to stop the launch timer, so we may as well make another custom event to do exactly that. We'll just call it end launch. So if it does not actually stop for some reason, like if we do hit a wall, if we end the launch and this hit an object and was deactivated, we want to stop the throw. So we can call end throw, the event that we made in our sword. Then we're going to take our launch timer and clear and invalidate the timer. And then, assuming we did hit an enemy or hit an object, we want to reset those variables after they are triggered. So we'll set hit enemy to be false and set hit object as well. So for our warps to strike, which we'll build out first, we'll call our end launch. Then we want to jump into our next part of our montage. So we'll open up the montage again. Then we'll get to about frame. Say 120. Right click at the top and create a new montage section. And we'll just call it strike. We'll go back to our third person character. So we'll drag in the mesh. We'll get the anim instance. And we'll get montage, jump to section. Choosing our montage, and then our section name we named as strike. So we'll drop our BP enemy into the map here. Okay, and you can see when it hits, it will go into that animation. We'll have to realign the sword, but we'll get into that when we get into calibration in a bit. So we want to teleport to the actor, so we'll set the actor location. We'll get our sword. We'll get the actor location, but we also want to have it go a little bit further back from wherever we hit. So we'll get the actor forward vector. Then we will add our actor location and we'll multiply the forward vector. By -100. And we can click teleport. So that will teleport us to the actor, but get us a little bit further away, so then it won't immediately start clipping with it. Then we're going to set our actor's rotation. And for that, we'll get our actor's location. Then find its look at rotation. Then we'll drag in our sword, and we want to get our target location. That way, if we end up clipping the side of its capsule, and we'll select teleport physics to be true, we will turn to hit the actor. And then after we do that, we want to attach our sword, just so that it's back in our character's hand. I'm going to go back into the warp strike, and we're going to say when the character gets about here, move this over to frame 42. That's much better. Now we'll go back to our sword, and we'll add a collision box. I'll attach that to our cube. And we'll scale that to like roughly the same dimensions. And you can make that as big as you want. That's going to be our hitbox for the damage being dealt through our strike. So after we get our location, we're going to give a little bit of wind-up time to the animation. We'll start off with like 0.5. This step's a bit optional, but it looks a bit better in my opinion. Then we're going to take our box, and we're going to bind an event to component begin overlap. We'll drag off and we'll create an event. Then we'll create a matching event. And we'll rename the event hit active. Very simply, we'll take a branch. We'll check to see if an actor that we collide with is equal to our enemy class. So we'll get the class. Then since our enemy is already going to be on the map, no problem casting to it. So we'll cast to VP enemy. We'll get the capsule component. Then we're going to set collision enabled. Because if we ragdoll this while we have the capsule set, when we simulate physics, it'll detach the mesh from the capsule, but the capsule is still going to have a collision on it. So then we're going to bump up it against an invisible area. Then we'll get the mesh. Then I'd like to set all bodies below simulate physics. So we'll check simulate, we'll make a literal name. And we'll just designate the pelvis. That way you can still sort of simulate physics in a way that we can grab it if you wanted this to work with the telekinesis tutorial I did not too long before this one. Then we'll just add an impulse against the mesh. We'll get the player character. Then we'll get its forward vector. Then we'll multiply. I'll have that be a velocity change. Change this to an integer and we'll say 10,000. Then we want to deactivate our hitbox. So we'll drag in our box. So then we'll unbind event from begin overlap. Then we'll create an event and we'll just select the function for our hit active. And now with our box, we can just type in hidden in game in the details and uncheck it so then we can see the mesh outline for that. Might need to turn down the delay a tiny bit. That gives a big heavy thwack. And that is pretty much it for just the attack, and there's a few embellishments that we can add to it, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Now we'll go back to our third-person character. And after we do our warp to strike before we attach the sword, we'll want to actually set our time dilation back to 1. And next we'll go to our warp to open. So for our warp to open, we're actually going to be leveraging event tick to move our character, because we're going to add a little bit of cool functionality, which is using a custom time dilation for our character. So then we have a little bit of a slow motion hiccup to our animation to make it flow a little bit better and look more true to the game that we're trying to emulate. So for a warp to open, first we're going to end our launch. Then we want to stop our character's movement. This will prevent us from falling and keeping us in the air. So set the movement mode to none. And when we throw the sword, we're going to be adding the time dilation before this point, so we're going to set custom time dilation. And set that to be 1, which is going to be our default. And we're going to make a new boolean, and this is going to be moving to sword. And we'll set it to be true. For our time dilation, right before we have our launch check timer, we're going to set that, have it be 0.1, so we slow down time to 1/10 of what it would be normally. And just in case we are throwing the sword and get hit when we get interrupted, we're going to also add our time dilation to 1 here in our interrupted event. Then with our event tick, we're going to get a branch, and we're going to check it against the moving to sword condition. If this is true, we're going to set our actor's location. And our destination is going to be the product of our vinterp to constant. We'll change the delta time to 2 and the interp speed to 10. And we'll get our actor location for our current, and the target location is going to be the location of our sword. Then we'll get a branch after our actor location, and we're going to take our actor location and our get actor location for our sword and collapse this into a node. We'll just call this reached location. We're going to be stripping the Z values from this. So then we're only focusing on X and Y. I find with the vector math it works out a bit better, so we're going to just break these. And then we're going to make vector. And just connect the X and Y of each. And then we'll get a double equal. And we'll say something like 30. This kind of depends on where the sword is being thrown, because the actor's location and the sword's location are not going to be on the same z-axis, but if we have it too far away from the X and Y, then we'll grab the sword too soon. If you have a custom mesh that has a different location, or you're throwing with a different animation that may have it be higher up. So we'll go back to our event here, and after we get this branch, we're going to take our moving to sword and change it to be false. That way we're turning off of our set actor location and nothing else is going to be processed on tick. Then we get to the sword. Then we can attach it. Then we want to end our montage, because if we get to the sword and we're still playing, it's going to do the whole loop. So we want to actually blend it out rather than just stopping it, since it's going to make it look a bit janky. So we'll take our mesh and we'll get the anime instance. Then we can call montage stop with blend out. And these are the same settings that you'll find in the montage for the blending settings. So we can split that as a structured pin. We'll see the blend out time is 1. Montage, we have to pick our warp strike. And then we want to take our set movement mode and set that back to walking, because if we do this on the ground, it'll be flush and we can start walking. But if we do it in the air, it automatically transitions to falling, so it doesn't do that little hiccup for the animation. Okay, so if we test it out, it's gone a bit further than I like, so we're going to go back to our BP sword and we're going to check the delay and just change it to 1/4 of a second rather than half. Looks a lot better. We'll take our blend time, change it to 0.5. That looks much better. And to accentuate the time dilation right before we get our launch check events, we can add a little bit of camera lag information here. To make that transfer from point A to point B look a bit more stylish. So we'll drag in our camera boom. And we're going to set camera lag. We'll set enable camera rotation lag. And we'll also set our camera lag speed. And for the lag speed, we'll say 6. And we could just tack this on to the end of our timer or before the timer event. Doesn't really matter. And when we go to our interrupt strike, when we are canceling the animation or we've completed the animation with our strike, we're just going to come down and tack on to the ending to disable the camera lag. If you have anything else that sets the camera lag to a different speed, we could just set it back to its default of 10 when it's enabled and uncheck the rotation. So now when we throw it, we'll see that there's a tiny bit of snapping that happens. That's going to be dependent on what animation you use and how fast you're transferring between positions, so we'll just get a delay. We'll start off at like 0.75. Now it's much less noticeable. Maybe better to make sure that after the delay, we'll set can move the same time that we can move the camera. And adjust the speed as needed. And we're also going to copy the sword hit enemy and hit object off of our end launch. And we're going to add that to the end of our strike interrupted. This may not be needed, but I always like to have something like this as a sort of break glass in case there's some set of frames where we're interrupted after we get a confirmation that we hit an enemy or an object. So the last bit that we're going to focus on is our warping to wall. Now this is going to just have our sword stick into the wall, and it's going to teleport our character to that location. We're also going to just do a simple check to see whether or not our character can fit in the end location, otherwise we're just going to return the sword back to the player. So we'll get our custom time dilation. And set that back to 1. We'll call in end launch. Then we're just going to do a capsule trace. This trace is going to be wherever our sword ends up landing, so we'll get the target location. Then we're going to have to add or subtract an offset. I know the animation that I have has the character stretching their arms up, so I know that we're going to have to subtract a bit. If you're using the animation from Mixamo, you can subtract 100 from it. That should be perfectly fine. Otherwise, you'll have to tool with that for your own animations. Then we're going to take our capsule component. We're going to get our scaled capsule radius. And connect it to our radius. Then we're going to get the scaled capsule half height. And since our arms are going to be over our head, we're going to need to add a little bit of distance to this, so we'll just add 30. And I'll set the debug for the duration. Then we'll get a branch. Much like our blend out animation here, actually copy all 3 of these. Paste our attached sword, montage blend, and our movement mode. We'll just detach movement mode for now. If we do end up hitting something with this trace, we're just going to reattach the sword and blend out the montage, because our character won't be able to fit in that spot. If it doesn't hit anything, and we know that our character can fit in the spot, we need to check to see the angle of the wall, because maybe we don't want to have a sword sticking in something that is barely angled, which I'll demonstrate in a moment. We're going to get our actor's up vector. Then we're going to take our sword, and we need to get the up vector of where our sword hits. So we'll go back to our sword here. And when we hit an object, we're going to need to set that target location that we're going to be using. And we also need to make a new vector for our up vector for us to check for the wall. So we can just call this hit up vector. Of type vector. And set it here. For the target location, we're going to specify where on our object we're going to grab. We could use the scene component. We could also have another scene added, which we're going to do. And we're just going to call this grab point. So we'll take our grab point, and then we'll get the world location. And that's what we'll move our character to. And the up vector, we're going to take the normal of the surface that we hit to get the direction, pointing straight out. So we'll just get rot from X. Then from this rotation, we can get the up vector. then the up vector is going to be our setting. Then back in our third person character, we'll get our hit up vector. Then we're going to compare these two to make sure that they're going in the same direction by getting their dot product. Then we're going to check to see if this is less than a certain point. So if our character's up vector and the sword's up vector are exactly the same, this dot product is going to return a 1. If they are inverted, then it's going to return a -1. So we'll just get a print. You can see that it's tilted a little bit now on the top left of the screen. It's 0.75. Now we go 0.34. I think anything less than that, not going to make too much sense, so we're just going to say if it's less than 34, or 0.34, sorry. Then we'll go on to the next step. So if it's not within that range, we're just going to, again, attach our sword and then blend out of the animation. Then we're going to set the actor location. The actor location is going to be our target location. Subtract, since that's going to be putting it in the middle of our character's mesh. You could test around with what makes sense. I know that it's going to be 145 with the animation that I provide. And we'll also need to move the actor over a little bit. But before we get there, to show you what we have so far, we'll attach our character movement and set it to be none. Okay, so now if we test this out, we'll see where this is headed. If it's going too far in like that, we need to adjust our grab point. So we'll just drag that over to the other side of our sword. So now if we try that again, we teleport through, character's still playing the animation, but we stick into the wall. So we're going to change our animation. Right after we stop our movement mode. So we're going to stop anim montage. And we'll select the only montage that we have. Then we'll want to go and add this to our animation graph for a new idle state. We'll get a blend poses by bool. Then we'll just promote the action value to a new variable. We'll just call it hanging, because that's what we'll be doing. So if it's false, we'll have that be our idle. If it's true, we'll import our hanging idle from Mixamo. Just gotta make sure that that animation is looping. Then we'll go back to the event graph. We'll have to cast to our third person character. Actually, just going to do a pure cast because we already know that this is the character's blueprint, so Then we'll make the same variable in our character here. And set that to be true. So now we have our character latch on at the location of our grapple point. We'll need to rotate the character. So we'll set our actor's rotation. And we're going to set it 90 degrees based on our sword's current rotation, because that could be angled into the wall. So we'll add our sword, we'll get the actor rotation, then we'll combine rotators and just add 90 to the Z value. And then we just need to add a little bit of an offset so that our character's hands are going to be on the handle. So off of our set actor location, we're going to get our actor's right vector. Then we'll multiply it. And we want to move this over to the right, so we'd be multiplying by 10, but we're going to be subtracting values here, so we'll subtract negative 10, because a negative times a negative is a positive. And now we have our character grabbing onto the handle and just hanging there. So once we get to that point, I want to go all the way back to our jump. And if we're currently in the hanging state, we're going to set hanging to be false. We're going to set our character's movement to falling. And if we did that, we can actually detach from the hanging, so then our sword stays in the wall. So if you wanted to do any cool effect like withdrawing the sword, you can do that. Otherwise, we're just going to call attach sword. I'm just going to turn off our traces now. So now this is going to be slanted too far for us to be able to latch onto, so the sword is just going to return back to our hand. And at the end of it all, because I know that I have been asked this question before, some people don't know how to set the attack to just trigger once, so if we do actually just set it up as is, we could just spam the left mouse button and it's going to restart the montage over and over again. So we could just get a branch, and we'll drag in the mesh since this is animation based. We'll get our anim instance. Then we could check to see if there is an animation playing. We can select any montage or just the select montage. We only have one montage, so it doesn't really matter which one. So now we can go and spam our left mouse button as much as we want, and it's not going to repeatedly stagger the attack. And we can also take our hanging and get an and bool. So then when we're hanging on the ledge, we can't just activate our throw. So that's that. If you watch up to this point, awesome. I think this is the longest tutorial I've done in a single video, and I still managed to cut content to it. So thank you, and shoutouts to the Pillar members, Winterberry Shark, K Panic, Shay Alexander, and Wolfpaws, and to everyone else who's supported me. If you like what I do, maybe you want some free stuff, or some blueprint components, maybe even a bit more than that, follow or subscribe on the coffee shop linked in the description. That's all I've got for you for now, so thank you again for watching, and as always, I hope you've been inspired.